moment. There is an auction next week for the 25-year bond, 15-year bond, but the mood right now is a little bit of uncertainty and confusion and doubt and fear of the market and people. And two things that is critically important. I'm going to first talk about Andrew. For 20 plus years, we have listened to Andrew. He's one of the source of information. And especially when he talks about something that you have no idea, you take it as close to not absolute truth. So such words coming from Andrew, like it was heavy. And I remember when I watched, someone sent me the video originally on Saturday evening, I think Saturday or Sunday morning, and watching to it, I'm like, oh my goodness, he cannot be so wrong. Far away from the truth. And I reached out to him, I talked to him. Good thing he was welcoming of my approach. I wrote the articles, sent him to him. He acknowledged a few things, but all of a sudden everything went all over everywhere. So today we're going to talk about just exactly the points he raised. Are we going to Ghana? Are we about to be Kenya? Is it the Kenyan mafias that own Uganda's treasury bonds, Kenyan mafias and what? All those positions, each and every one of them. So, but I think right now I have close to 70 people, so I can start. Let me start from this position. Andrew said there are 7 points which I'm going to talk about, and you will allow me to go one by one until we get to the end, because that's where majority of the things which people want to know are. Those who are liking the live again. The first point Andrew raised was, since 2020, Uganda has been borrowing short-term money at high interest rates from loan sharks and commercial banks in Kampala and in Kenya. Now, I will tell you two things. You have, when you're assessing the treasury bonds, you must assess them nga the economy. That's the truth. The treasury bonds are... I studied treasury bonds as an economist, but I never knew how to apply them. Treasury bonds are a monetary tool. A monetary tool, government jekosa to make sure the economy is going to direction jaga Uganda. It can also be a fiscal tool. Fiscal tool is supporting the budget. But let's focus so much on the treasury, on the monetary side of it. Uganda in 2020, almost every single country. I don't know if I have anyone here from the US. If you are there, you will maybe point to, you raise your hand up. Every single country from after the COVID hit, majority of the countries, they got stagnated. Like they got hit, the economic world got hit so much. For those people who are in the US would tell you, they had to even give them what they call COVID slips. Was it like 2,700 each person for all? Imagine paying people to just, because people weren't working, the economy came to a standstill. So majority of the countries ended up leaning so much towards borrowing. So much that almost everywhere, UK, they had to issue, the government, Bank of England had to issue significant amount of debt to finance economic recovery. At that time, Chancellor Wabwe, Rishi Sunak, nataka a full program to just make sure people go to the pubs, because in the UK they do understand that pubs are an important element of revamping the economy. And what did they do? They had to issue treasury, for them they call them gilts. They had to issue gilts. So it was not unique to Uganda that from 2020, they were borrowing. There was an increase in borrowing because in 2020, the taxes literally came to zero. The economy was not working. There was no jobs that were high. The only jobs that were working were farmers, but also farmers, you can't tax farmers. So it was extremely pressurized. Now, over UK, but Uganda, then we come 2021, there is a revamp. Then in 2022, the war in Russia and Turkey starts. That war, everyone knows what it did to inflation. Now, that's going to come back to a point which we're going to talk about later when we're talking about Ghana. Uganda is hit by significant inflation at the time by official rates. Inflation in Etuka at close to 10%. It had never been there for close to, in over a 10-year period, the inflation had to 10%. The worst inflation you told it was the corner yalimu 2011 after the election. There was so much inflation, like there was so much money that spread in the 2011 election. For those of you who ababijukira 2011, that by the time the election got done, the inflation that we had in Uganda was so high. But come 2022, we have so much cost push inflation because the global economy came to a standstill because of the Russia-Ukraine war. We are a net importer. We couldn't import so very well. We are a net importer in Uganda, versus China. But the economy got stabilized. Then in 2022, that's the first time Uganda issued a 20-year bond in 2022. And they issued it at 18.5%, which got so much oversubscribed. They brought a second one at 17.75%. It got so much oversubscribed. They issued another one. Like, they stopped it. They brought another one, which came in at 15%. Anyway, so between 2020 to 2025, almost all the global economies have been surviving on borrowing. Uganda, Kenya, UK, US, everywhere. Because the economies have been going, the global economy where we say capital flows, they have been going through so much that pressures from Uganda, from Kenya, from everywhere. Right now we are dealing with the Iraq war, which is extremely important because to a country like Uganda, which depends extremely so much on Saudi Arabia and Dubai, because those are our biggest major foreign exchange and our trading partners. Right now they are suffering. The United Arab Emirates is suffering. All of us are suffering, and that's important. So you have to look at that in that context. Then you come back. So on the point where he said we have been borrowing significantly locally using treasury bonds, Andrew is absolutely 100% right. There has been an increase in our debt from 2022, 2023 to where we are now. Naye nga temunaba kwerabira abantu abasinga wano mu 2022, 2023 parliament bwe yali eyise etteeka ly'ebisiyaga mwali wagira. Yes. One of our undoing was that act. You know? So there are times when we're going to have to talk about this in the realistic way. That let me do this live in a way that is open-minding to you. And if you are an investor here, you get the whole picture and you make a better informed decision. And just stick with me, just like the live and share the live, you will get the points I'm trying to address, right? In 2022, 2023, Parliament ingegezako ku debating etteeka ly'ebisiyaga, the Anti-Homosexuality Act, abasinga mwali wagira. Etteeka, it was one of our worst deal from an economic perspective, right? From an economic perspective, because we twaliyisa World Bank and it's suspending to lend us money. But twaliyisa European Union cutting reducing our funding. Right? So the bidding is again, but World Bank was the most important because World Bank comes with IMF, it comes with the International Development Fund. Those are the best concessional lenders globally. You want to have those in your pipeline. So when you refuse, when we ended up passing that act, boom, that was our own goal. The second goal came in, which Andrew talked about, was USAID. When USAID left, USAID was one of the biggest funders of the government programs, especially education and health. Actually, that's a fact. We know it. But America, mwebale kulonda. I know I have a few Americans on live. Mwebale kulonda. That brought in that direction of impact. So, so Andrew was true on two things. One, there has been significant borrowing by Uganda using the treasury bonds or domestic bonds, and the two, which is importantly also, that there's been a reduction in the concessional loans in Uganda. But the story doesn't stop there. The story starts with what he said. Is Uganda going to Ghana in 2 years? Because I think that's what everyone wants to hear. Now, Uganda is going to the Ghana side. You have to understand what made Ghana where it ended up being. You have to understand what made Ghana be in a situation that it was in 2022, and you draw parallels to where we are as a country like Uganda. That's all it's going to come back to exactly that point. Now, let me start with one. In 2022, you have to go back 10 years before, in 2012. Between 2012 to 2014, there was a push by the global economies for African countries to issue what we call Euro bonds. Ekigambo Euro bonds is going to feature so much. Waliwo muvubuka atera okumpandikira bu notes n'abuteekamu awo, people to follow later, but the rest namulabako. There was so much push by global economies to have Africans borrow money in a commercial way, and the commercial way by issuing Euro bonds. Ensi ezafuna Euro bonds nga Kenya, nga Malawi, Zambia, Ghana, Egypt, Nigeria, Cote d'Ivoire. There were like 14 countries in Africa. Now, before 2012, African countries had always borrowed concessionally. Nga zigenda mu parish clubs, obanga zigenda mu World Bank, IMF, Africa Development Bank, like that, because those are concessional loans. Now there is this push for them to borrow commercially. And the Euro bond, the only thing you have to appreciate on a Euro bond is this. You are lending it to international investment clubs, like the big banks, the city banks, the Standard Chartered, all those big investment companies. And the question was, why was there a push to have African countries take on the Euro bonds? At the time, Africa was rising. At the time, Africa yali yetaga infrastructure projects. Roads in Kenya when we bakolerawo SGR. So you have to understand it from that context. So one of the countries that took the Euro bond or took a significant Euro bond was Ghana. So, and the majority of those Euro bonds were 10 years. 10 years. So in 2021, 2022, between 2022 and 2024, that was the first tranche of where they had to pay their Euro bond maturities. So in Ghana's situation comes in two ways. By mid-2022, they had close to 6 months before their first tranche of close to $1.5 billion okubeera ng'emachuwaling, and they had to pay it off. $1.5 billion. That is one. So to look at it at Uganda, we do not have a Euro bond. And for the wisdom and of the people who decided that Uganda should not take a Euro bond, I remember that I've done good research, but I've got some confidential information. That was Governor Mutebire at the time, PSSS Timo Hakanizi, and at the time the Minister of Finance, Ezra Suruma abangambi yakyaliyo era ngena muno nyako mubuzeeko. Those three people said we do not need the Euro bonds at the time because they believed we do not have the capacity to take on $1 billion as an economy. That was majority of their thinking. But it was a thinking that right now is protecting the country. So help me like the life and we keep moving. So botegere ekintu ekirugamba Ghana mu 2022 etuuka nga bulayo emyezi mukaaga nga yetaaga close to $2 billion to pay. At the time, Ghana, their total reserves is a USD because every country keeps reserve. Every country. Uganda, we have close to $5 billion in reserves. They call them import cover. What money you need for people to import or to export like that. Etuka mu 2022, mid 2024. Nga teina we sobola kujja $2 billion. $2 billion. Nga ine ebintu bibiri byesobola okukola ku issuing new Euro bond. Naye ate ku issuing new Euro bond nga ate yegezaako kugi issuing tesobola lwaki. At the time the Russian war, Ukraine war had started. So now I want you to start paying attention how things start to add up. Bobo goberira kati wanu njagala ofocusinga otegere Ghana bwe yali otegere Uganda weeri, and you make a decision that your bonds in Uganda are safe, right? So today okukintu kino May 2022 Ghana has tugenda kwogera ku treasury bonds e Ghana, but let's first focus. It has a Euro bond The Eurobond, there is pressure for them to pay, but they do not have the money because in dollars, you must have the dollars. You must have either a dollar equivalent asset, nga gold. We're going to talk about gold, how Uganda is starting to buy gold right now. We're going to talk about Ghana is enough gold, enough gold reserves, not enough dollar reserves, and yet the dollar had to be the bond had to be paid, or they could default by November. And the market got to know about it. This is Eurobond, not Treasury bonds. The market got to know about it. And the two things happened. When you have, as a country, when you are to borrow, you can either borrow locally or internationally. You can borrow new debt or you can roll over a new debt. Roll over no government in a gulaka. Let me borrow more money to pay off the old debt. Ghana negeza ko kwagalo raising a new euro dollar, a new euro bond. Neremwa. Because otalo lwali lutandise, ngekitegeza there is otalo lutandika. Investors, especially international investors, they move the money from emerging economies to safe havens. Ekyokubiri nga batandise okulaba that Ghana is struggling with liquidity. At the time, mu 2022, nga the pension funds, the commercial banks, the Bank of Ghana itself, nga all of them, they have significant amount of debt. Inflation in Ghana never from the lows of 5, 7, 8%, netuka close to 50%. I know Mwenda mentioned that actually. That was very true. Now imagine your inflation in Uganda, ngechintu kyabadogula omutwalo gumu, ochigula emitwalo kati kumpi gumu kitundu ba emitwalo ebiri in a space of 2 to 3 months. Omukulu abuza what is Euro bonds? Euro bonds are bonds issued in a different Euro bonds are bonds issued in a different currency, most times the US dollar. So you issue them to the international market. They list them in the London Stock Exchange, but in the dollar value. So not in your local currency. They use them to bring in some FX into the country. Where was I? So Ghana network ekiseera nga all their debt is held by pension funds nga tesiyina where to borrow to lend. Banks nga ziri constrained. Bank of Ghana nga eri constrained. They can no longer struggle. They can no longer raise any dollars to pay off the loan. Inflation net come 50%. And the worst of the worst was SEDI against the dollar depreciated so much to the extent of 70%. So they had two problems. They had a significant inflation in a space of literally 2 to 3 months. Then they have significant depreciation of their FX in a space of like 4 to 5 months. And it was a market squeeze. So much tight that the cost of living in Ghana, no matter wherever you are, you were impacted. And the government had to wake up. They had to go back to IMF to say, IMF, we need help. It was extremely painful and bad. They needed to pay the Euro bond. The market, the international market was not lending them any more money. IMF, the Bank of Ghana reached a level when they can no longer, Bank of Ghana is the equivalent of Bank of Uganda. They could no longer sell treasury bonds. Actually, in 2022, the SEDI bonds, as are locally denominated, they were so much undersubscribed that the Bank of Ghana must print money to fund the government. And that made the situation even worse in terms of inflation. So, which one do you think Uganda is at right now? None. Peter, Uganda taina treasure, taina Euro bonds. So we do not have, we're not about to go through that FX squeeze. We do not have a Euro bond. We have dollar denominated loans, but those are not on the market. They are not tradable. Majority of them are concessional with IMF, with Africa Development Bank, with the European Union, some of them with China. We have even a loan with Nigeria. So we are not in the same situation that Ghana was 4 years ago. What made the situation bad in Ghana? Tinechituka chiseera nga by December, nga the government can no longer raise enough money to pay off anything. It can't raise in tax, it can't raise in lending. It cannot roll over its debt. It cannot get any money anywhere to say, let me borrow $1 million here and I pay Kakande. Let me borrow $1 million and I pay Anita. Let me borrow $1 million and I pay so and so. It was that a bad situation. In Uganda, we are not there. No. For two reasons. Esoka, Boba dogo bera treasury bonds nga you are an investor for the last 1 year, which is extremely important. For the last 1 year, every single time the government has left money on the table. A month ago, auction year Feb, they left over $1 trillion UGX. They rejected it. Frank, we are different live. We are talking about something totally different. So question is that today second as it damwe. It's there is something which we are talking about. I'll pay attention to the other questions that are addressing the Chetuliko. So government right now in Uganda, the liquidity is enough. The appetite for the government to raise money is enough. For as long as the Bank of Uganda and the government can still raise debt, we are still good to go. Ghana, in 2022, interest rates are almost 40%. 40% in 2022. Nezivamu from the standard 16-15% to almost 30-40% in a squeeze of 30-40, a squeeze of 3 to 4 months. In Uganda, the highest our interest rates have been is 17.95 last year. And it was important because it was an election period. It's not the first time. It's not the first time. In 2011, interest rates in Uganda zatuka ku 20%. In 2016, zatuka 19-20%. In 2021, we avoided it. It was a COVID year. In 2025, there's karugambe 18%. Lwaki zatuka ku 18%? Buli ebiseera buli lwotuuka mu Uganda, buli tugenda mu election, the market makers demand a premium. That premium is an election premium because we know to on a certain election period. It's not an indicator of liquidity crisis. Because tulina okwawula ebintu bino. Mwenda kyatanyonyodde kye kino kyatayogedde konti. A high interest rate doesn't mean that you are in a crisis to not pay. And it was a high interest rate for 1 year. Right now, interest rates are back to 14% and they are still going down. If for any indication, actually, interest rates going down, it means the government has this in control. That's one, right? So we are not in a situation where Ghana was, Ghana was in 25-30%. No, we are not in a situation where Ghana was, where they had the Euro bonds. No, we are not in a situation where Ghana could not raise any new debt. Uganda can raise debt right now. Chovola waliwo mwala ku TikTok kuno akola very good content from a political perspective. Then she went and sensationalized the report and said, oh my God, 46% of our taxes are going to treasury bonds, interest and whatsoever. Accounting and the realities are different. Any country that can no longer borrow is in a crisis. Because for as long as you can no longer borrow money for the future, you are in a crisis. Ghana it can no longer borrow. To pay attention to it, you have to look at, for example, Nigeria. Last year, at the beginning of last year, Nigeria's treasury bonds zatuka almost 33-34% interest rate. But Nigeria did not default. If FX in Nigeria yava ku close to 700 naira to almost 1,500 in one single year. Chitegezo omuntu abadde ne $100 obadde ofuna naira 7 mitwalo kasanvu ba mitwalo 7 in one single year ofuna mitwalo 14. That was significant depreciation, but Nigeria did not default. Lwaki? Nigeria could borrow. Sports wabuza what does rollover mean? Rollover kitegeeza nti bwebanga esawe tuse yokusasula government ngesobola okwewola nesa sente empya ne kusasula ne yongezayo ebanja. Kiddayo ku bintu bibiri nti ebintu bibiri very technical naye mujja kufuba okubinnyonnyola then munambuza ebibuzo munalemererwa nti mu 2022 Ghana nga tesobola kwewola ngeyina amabanja close to 40% of amabanja gayo ngeyina ogasasula between 2022 and 2023. So it was a liquidity crisis. Liquidity they need money urgently, but yet chochali yasobola kubawola. Uganda, we are not in any liquidity crisis. Lwachi Uganda treasury bonds ezisinga they are long term, so long term. The government yaka issuing a 25-year bond, 25-year bond until 2050. So they cannot default in 2 years because their treasury bonds are long term, 25 years, 20 years, 15 years, 10 years. The average time to maturity of our treasury bonds is over 9 years from now. So we are not about to go into a situation where the government itaga sente nyingi nyo in a shortest time possible for it to be paid. For as long as we avoided that situation, we are good to go. Ghana chialimu. For the second element, tugende wane Kenya. Mu 2024, how many of you, you were investing in treasury bonds at the time? How many of you wanted to go and invest in treasury bonds in Kenya? How many of you in 2024 ngamwafuna amababa nti Alex, how do I buy treasury bonds in Kenya? Kiri ali walina okubawo omuntu omu oba babiri abalikinga live neyanza. No one. Okay. Do you know that Kenya's treasury bonds, local debt eziri mu Kenya shilingi? Elizabeth Agami went there in March. Mu 2024 zatuka kwa 18.5. Nga Uganda tufuna 15. Nga every single day, every single month they issue a report in Kenya elimu 15, elimu 18, 18.5, 19%. And we wanted to have a percentage of that. Nenge Uganda tulimuchi. Tulimu 14, 15. Do you know what created the Kenya to be in that situation? They had the Euro bond that was maturing in June 2024. Chideo ku Euro bonds bulinsi Zambia wano. Tugende Zambia. I tried to find a way to present some of the things. Then again, it would create so much work for me. Zambia, muja kola mabi research. Zambia, treasury bonds are to come almost 27% interest rate. Luachi, they went through a liquidity crisis because of the Euro bonds. Eye Kenya wano, IMF yamala kujja nebawa $1.5 billion eyabasobozesa okwewola okusasula the expiring debt, then rates nezitandika okukoma wansi mu 2020 end mu December 2024. Uganda terimu liquidity crisis. So omuntu yenayina kugamba that Uganda is about to go into a debt crisis. We are not in a liquidity crisis, which was caused by the Euro bond. But tukomewe Kenya wano simply, for example, Kenya tutuka mu 2024 Feb there March. Waliwo omuntu twakava mu kalu waliwo omukulu omugagga omu mu Kenya bamuyita Jimmy Wanjigi abamumanyi bobo goberera nnyo ku byabufuzi bya Kenya. Mugagga w'amaanyi nnyo. Between 2023 to 2024, he was hosted on every single radio you can think of. Ng'agamba Kenya bwegenda okudefaultinga. Ng'agamba Kenya bwegenda okufa okugwa. And the problem became worse. Kenya's FX nerinya neva mu 100 negena 168. So bad. It was a situation in Kenya, it was actually very bad. It was scary. It was scary. Let me not even try to downplay it. Nga buligezako nechituka chisera nga government ye Kenya buligezako ku issuing a new treasury bond bwe yagala 1 billion efunako million rukaga. Kasitotuka in that situation where the money you want to raise is no longer enough. What's FX? Baja kudama abamu abaliwa bachitegera. Notuka mu level nga sente zoyagala okuraising atuchasobola kuziraising and the market gets to know about it. The market will squeeze you. Era kyali Kenya between Jan 2024 to June 2024. When IMF came in, IMF yaja ne concession zali biri. Esooka, increase your tax. Ekyokubiri, reduce your spending. Government negezako ku increasing their tax. We all remember what happened during that Mamudanos. Abagoberera ebyobufuzi mubijjukira. Nze mbigoberera from my economic perspective and finance. But mubijjukira olutalo lwaliwo olw'amaanyi ennyo abavuga we shall not pay. Now to the young people at the time, for them, they're like, no, you cannot tax us so much. Tebamanya, the country was almost about to go into crisis. But the day IMF gave them the 1.5 billion, I still remember it was June 17th, 2024. Next week, Kenya, we had a more issuing a bond, it was oversubscribed. Since then, rates za Kenya zivude mu 18, ziriku 10, 11%. But two things have ended up happening in Kenya. Zona Euro bonds is what is going to expiring in the next 3 years. Kenya has already bought them back, ne issuing a long-term bond, long-term Euro bonds, 2039, 2041. Because now the market has confidence that Kenya can raise and can pay. And for as long as the market knows that you can pay, you can give it, you can borrow cheaply. You can borrow cheaply. So that crisis Kenya jiayitamu was because of the Euro bond. But even Kenya did not default. Why? It continued to have the ability to borrow. Esaweno, Kenya can raise debt wherever it wants at even a cheaper price. And people are still lending it money. Kenya has just recently issued another Euro bond. Now, some of these Euro bond crises, one time they will catch up, right? But for as long as the country echasobola to repay, to borrow in the market and roll over, katawade bangoberera ekigambo roll over katuna so kitegeeza nti ebbanja lino liggwako n'ofuna eppya n'osasula bano lino n'olyongerayo for long term, then you will never be in a position where you are defaulting. Uganda, our rollovers are okay. Our rollovers are okay. Uganda has never been in a situation where, because for us, our debt, which is the Treasury Bond, abantu abasagaza to invest in wano, right? Every time there is a maturing debt, the government can issue another debt to pay that off. And for as long as you can do that, then they will always be in position to pay. Now, for the ethical people like Solomon, they will roll over is you borrow to pay another debt. I know it's not it's not from that perspective, but why would you borrow to pay debt? Of course, it's a country. Tukirize tugane Uganda, bobo tuna Uganda. You either see this as an opportunity or you see it as a problem. The first one is, as a country, emisoro gyaffe minafu. Ekyo Mwenda yakyogerako ate nga mutuufu. Omusoro gwaffe gwe tusasula mutono. URA 2025-26 bajagaza trillion yana. Trillion yana kan. N'obwetubanga temulimu zero corruption. Trillion yana tezisobola kumala. Owulidde? Trillion yana tezisobola kumala. Shaba twakatandika ojja gwe wetuli. Ebintu ebyo twakatandika butandisi tukyagenda tukinyonyola kimu ku kimu. Trillion ante sobola kumala. Kitegeeza, a country like Uganda, we are still in a way to borrow. Okitegeera. Ne oil contracts wezinajja muganda wange Elliot. Ne contracts wezinajja. Nigeria, do you know Nigeria is the biggest Africa oil exporter? Nigeria. But Nigeria still borrows. Actually, treasury bonds in Nigeria ziri between 20 to 23%. Nina client wangalie Nigeria, she's Ugandan but works in Nigeria. Namugamba gula ku treasury bonds in Nigeria nga Alex Sisobola. Bana abasajja rate zaabwe zabagulu nnyo zitya. No, they will pay. Angola is here. Angola has one of the biggest oil wells and diamonds whatsoever. And even with the oil wells, oil money will help us on one thing. It will make us to get majority of the infrastructure going, but the borrowing will continue. So, for as long as the government, actually, let me first put the caveat here. For as long as the government is and can continue to borrow money locally and internationally, you should never worry on a default. Chovola banti Ghana yochi yayina maturing debt. It can no longer borrow internationally. Literally, people refused to lend money to government. Ghana. That's the crisis. But let me now extend the conversation in Ghana. What really happened in Ghana? Although I don't know if to get the situation, what it was, because I wanted to first explain what the situation was in Ghana before what became a default, then what ended up happening. Tukitegedde bulungi awo. Abalayikinga live neyanza Elizabeth kinyambako netambula bulungi. Abantu ne bakimanya nti kwetuli. I know I'm seeing a few questions coming in on WhatsApp. Okay. Njakuziddamu edda. Kati tugende what exactly happened in Ghana after the default. Now, tutegedde nti Uganda. Our treasury bonds are owned by the loan sharks in Kenya and commercial banks. Now, Uganda's treasury bonds, to investing the community that I'm so proud of. Right now I have close to 150 people. How many people here who are invested in the treasury bonds? Like you are really invested, you have a treasury bond. I want to see, is there a way I can do a poll? Because the poll will give me okay, you're not there. The poll will give me, how many people here who are here are invested in the treasury? Like you own it. Because those ones, whatever answer or decisions we make, they know. Tugule, tutunda. Those are the people I'm interested in the most. So, a Ghana, a Uganda one, our treasury bonds and treasury bills are owned 30% by provident funds. Provident funds, the biggest there is NSSF. Yes, NSSF. How many of us here have NSSF? How many of us here save with NSSF? You know, nzenina kasente mu NSSF. Provident funds, abaine minime mirungi. While you other insurance companies, Ezirinanga, Zamaras, other provident funds, mpitirivu, pension and provident funds. Holiday. The second biggest owner of our treasury bonds are commercial banks. Now, those two elements, we're going to come back to them in a minute because I want you to understand how treasury bonds work. We relate it to Ghana and come back to Uganda and you make an informed decision. When you back and forth, so the second one is owned by commercial banks. The third is owned by insurances, which brings in, I believe, the unit trusts. Right? The unit trusts. Katigwaina sente mu unit trust aonawe wogwa. Between the pension funds, the commercial banks, and the insurances and unit trusts, they own close to 75%. I think so. Or I think over 65% of our treasury bonds and bills. Think about it. How many companies are there? Commercial banks, how many are they? Insurance, how many are they? And pension funds, how many are they? They own almost 65%. NSSF alone, I can categorically tell you, NSSF your car, it owns close to 16 trillion of Uganda's debt. 16. More than half of NSSF assets ziri mu Uganda's debt at face value as outstanding today, not at amortized level. Gwosubira NSSF enchegenda kera nga government issuing the treasury bond, NSSF government sigenda kuola treasury bond, sigenda kuola government. Or what do you think we're going to wake up on a day government yegambe tegenda kusasula NSSF? It's impossible. Why? Even in Ghana, what they call the debt management program, the domestic debt exchange program, pension funds were carved out. We're going to talk about, like, pension funds, they were carved out. Because ngoyagala olutalo lunatwala government yonna kwata ku people's pensions. Globally, you do not joke with people's pensions. So, for as long as NSSF, the biggest pension fund in the country, and not potentially even in East Africa, can still lend to the government of Uganda, you will always be paid, my friend. That means government will always have the ability to roll over. Echokubiri, the commercial banks. The commercial banks are the second biggest owners of treasury bonds and treasury bills in Uganda. You will give someone even the evidence of everything and they will be like, everything is possible, because for them, that's where their mind has been locked in. Commercial banks, they are leaning towards lending the government than lending towards the private sector, because they make so much money in the treasury bonds and treasury bills at the least cost possible, at the lowest cost possible. Now, if some people fault me for promoting treasury bonds and I say it's creating a crowding out effect of the private sector, then it's one point that I know I do not respond to for two reasons. One, banks were lending to the government before the Kakandes started talking about treasury bonds. Why? It's part of their mandate to buy you government's treasury bonds and treasury bills. I can never sit here and I tell you I'm advising the bank to buy more treasury bonds. They do that whether you like it or not, and they have been doing it for the longest time possible using your savings. So banks lend to government whether you like it or not. It's in their strategy, it's in their very nature to make money. They make money there. So my crusade for the retail investors is literally to empower the retail investors. But the point where we are talking about today is to tell you that treasury bonds, the banks, for as long as the banks are fully exposed to the treasury bonds, the crisis of you not paying those commercial banks is literally crashing the whole financial system. From the fundamentals of the impact of each and every single bank not having money to pay your money. The closest just could desire to someone genda wanowa a Greece, where Greece had so much debt. They went into austerity measures. It was a euro-denominated debt. They went into so much measures. There was no money in banks. People were laid off and everything. If that situation ever comes to life, and it's possible, the probability of it is very remote, and it's not in the next 2 years, not even in the next 5 years, but it's extreme. It's possible. It's highly improbable, but it's there. If it ever comes to that level, Muganda wange, omulimo jja kuba tokyalina, buli kimu kijja kukonziba. Is that the word to use, kukonziba? Abamanyi Oluganda abalikinga live neyanzege. Is that the word to use, kukonziba? Like everything will come to a standstill because the whole financial system is literally anchored on the treasury bonds. Your pension is in the treasury bonds. Half of your money that you think you have in a bank is in the treasury bonds. That if tomorrow the government can't pay the banks will have you will never withdraw that money. Bank run will cause everything to crash. Because I've brought in bank run, I don't know how many people follow the news. Imagine 30 people going to the bank and never got to so about sentes what to zirina. So you would think that million trillion kumi is standing bikzeina mu deposit bazirina mu cash. Tuliomba genda kakane kwa tezo now. No. Either that money is lent to the people out there abaine emirimo, or it's lent to the government of Uganda. Right? Now let's do a 360 recycling. Let's Jose Agame Chadi Brazil. Now let's do a 360% 360 recycling of the impact of one of things like that. Abantu nemukere ncha nemuga nti fena twetaga sente zaffe. Banks zijja closing, that's the fact. But this is what will happen. They will just say we don't have your money because abayina amabanja bebazuola bakakande. At that point, the businesses are not working, so kakande cannot pay his loan. Nebaba yakuwa security nga chapa cha taka, you can't sell it out because no one has money. So you have that bad debt from kakande. Government can't give you the money because even the government cannot give you the money. Now all of a sudden, buli muntu mu economy agenda crashing out. That a catastrophic economic failure will impact everyone. It's not what happened in Ghana, but it happened in Brazil. It happened in Greece. But by the fact that banks are still lending to the government, it's because they can assess the impact there. To the extent possible, let me add this statement for any investor, even if you don't listen to Kakande, his conclusions. You follow the big guys. You go and follow what the banks are doing and what the pension funds are doing. For as long as they are still borrowing or lending to the government, you continue lending to them. Only 10% of our debt is owned by the foreign people. 10%. Ntiku trillion nkaga mumukaga, close to 70 trillion, zeziri owned by people who are not institutions that are not Ugandan. What we call foreign investors. So that means our debt is in the local economy. And the government or the people at Bank of Uganda that manages this system, the people at Ministry of Finance, they know. And they will do everything humanly possible to make sure we never reach that level. Not that we cannot, but the situation that Ghana was in is not the situation we are in. But even when Ghana reached that situation, this is what happened. Omanyi batwogera ekigambo default. Nga Andrew Mwenda musajja mugezi nga bwe yakyogedde. Omanyi mu economy ekigambo default kitegeeza onkubiddeyo Edi mukwano gwange wano ne muwala milioni zange 5 bw'atansasula ankubiddeyo wano twakolako wano video nga ngamba abantu musasule sente z'abantu. Bantu bayitirivu tebagala sasula abantu baba blocking. Right? Many of us have people we have lent money to. If your understanding of a default of a country is that simplistic, no. A default of a country is when you are unable to pay your debt and you restructure it, it's considered a default. Over defaultings. Not a Kenya. A Ghana. Chebakola. They got debt in area maturing in the next 1 to 2 years. 1 to 3 years. They bundled it up, plus your interest, plus everything they have not yet paid you, and they gave you an option to take a new debt, which is long term. All they were trying to manage is liquidity. There is a difference between liquidity and solvency. The only time a country can become insolvent, ngeri mu lutalo nga bolaba gundi Libya ensi neegwa naye eraba n'ensi egwa esigala solvent. Imwe Libya bacha collecting taxes. Country can go through a liquidity crisis. So Ghana yita mu liquidity crisis. Era yakola yakwata all the bonds that were maturing in 2022, 2023, 2024. Nezbandolinga, neziddiza abantu for 2025 until 2038. Chiba kitegeeza nti kakande wawa ina bondi ya milioni sedi ngemachualinga mu 2023. Bakuwa option okwata yo milioni sedi ne interest zobadde zibatana bakusasula ne bazikuwa mu bondi empya egenda mu 2030 at a different bond. So they did not default nti bakubirayo abantu nti tebabasasula. Akantu ako mukategede kantu kakulu nnyo in how governments default, and for you to make a decision to bring it home. Let's even create the worst case scenario. Nti oyina bondi maturing mu 2030. By 2030, let's assume in 2030 there is a crisis that literally is going to cause the government of Uganda to default. Abala kingala if neyanza, you are my heroes. By 2030, then instead of paying you cash, government in Uganda no, eno bond join ya milioni emu katukwemu bond ya 2040. Nini basigalanga bakusasula yo coupons, just they have extended your payment, the principal, from now to 2030 to for 10 years, just to reduce the pressure of them paying everything now. And two, it was a voluntary exercise. Era abantu abagana babasasula sente zaabwe. Era ekyabayambako abaddeko ku live twatandikidde nti the problem started with the Eurobond. IMF yajja neba wa sente ne basoka na basasula Eurobonds. Eyo crisis ya dollar Eurobond nekendera. Then they restructured their SEDI bonds, their cocoa bonds. They have like 3 or 4 types of bonds. By the cocoa bond is issuing to just fund cocoa farmers. Uganda tetubirina. Mufuna. So that even in a situation where they might be, where the government cannot pay, tubagenda kugamba nti aze tukwaddeko zimala. No. They get the total outstanding value of your loan. Waliwo abagambe coffee bonds would be better. But tuli mu crisis baloza tubagenda defaulting amagala ba issuing coffee bonds. Piro, you have followed me for close to 1 year plus. But somehow you followed Mwenda for 3 minutes, and that's the absolute truth. It's so funny. By the way, they gave them the exact outstanding amount. The exact outstanding amount. Amaso go mukuru bagamba amaso go muganda gali mu ngalo. Let me maybe start showing you some of these. I didn't want to go into the presentation side of things, because it means I have to get off the screen. But if it will take that, let me see. Mumpemwe dachika, just I'm trying to